the most terrifying cave rescues of all time. Nickajack Cave Rescue. On August 15, 1992, three friends, Dave, Scott, and Alex, were preparing to explore Nickajack Cave, a flooded cavern in Marion County, Tennessee. This wasn't your typical hangout spot. A metal fence and warning signs blocked the entrance. The cave was home to rare bats, and diving there was seriously dangerous. But beneath the fence was a narrow underwater gap, a shortcut some dared to take and never came back. Around 10:30 p.m., the friends gathered and geared up outside the cave. Their target was a catfish, a giant one, rumored to weigh over 200 pounds. Without hesitation, friends dropped into the water with no guidance and no formal cave diving training, just air tanks, flashlights, and a plan to catch the monster fish. At first, everything went smoothly. They swam deeper, their flashlights cutting through the water, but the further they went, the darker it got. Visibility dropped rapidly. The tunnels had no markings and the fish were nowhere to be seen. After some time, Dave checked his air. It was low. He gave the signal to ascend. Scott and Alex agreed. Together they turned and began to swim up, but something went wrong. Instead of surfacing, their heads hit solid rock, a ceiling of stone above them. They remained conscious, but had gone deeper than they realized. Panic set in. They knew the exit was somewhere behind them, but had no idea where. In the chaos, their fins stirred up silt, and within seconds, they were completely blind. Dave swam off in one direction. Scott and Alex went in another. Still, both of them somehow managed to reach the surface just in time, their tanks nearly empty. But Dave was missing. Scott and Alex screamed his name. Hours passed, with no reply. One of them went back to the car, drove to the nearest town, and called 911. Rescuers arrived within the hour. When they saw the scene, they knew it would be a long, dangerous night. Unfortunately, none of the rescuers were certified cave divers. Still, they tried, but each dive brought them back empty-handed. Meanwhile, cave rescue expert Buddy Lane heard about the incident on the news. He hadn't been called, but he knew this cave better than anyone. He pulled out an old map, made before the dam flooded the area, and formed Nickajack Lake, submerging the cave entrance back in 1967. And that's when he saw it. Some small air pockets, not far from where Dave had disappeared. He called the scene commander and begged to join the effort, but the answer was no. Everyone believed it was a recovery, not a rescue. With no other option, Buddy called someone higher up, Mark Caldwell, an executive at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. They had worked together before. Mark listened carefully and ordered the Nickajack Dam lowered by 14 inches. Dropping the water level could open up airspace inside, just enough to keep Dave alive. It would cost thousands in lost power and might not work at all, but it was their only shot. As the water dropped, Buddy and his teammate Dennis went in and kept going. They called out for Dave. Nothing. They called again. Then a weak voice. He answered. Dave was alive. He had found an 8-inch air pocket between the ceiling and the water and was stuck for almost 18 hours. And if the dam hadn't lowered, he wouldn't have had a chance. Riesending Cave Rescue. On June 8, 2014, three cave researchers, Johann Westhauser with his teammates Bastian and Robert, were preparing for a mapping expedition inside the Riesending cave system near the German-Austrian border. This place was known for its narrow, cold tunnels, in some areas barely wider than a human shoulder, but it was considered safe because the path was marked and ropes were already in place. It was supposed to be a routine trip, until it wasn't. At first, everything was going well. The researchers had successfully finished mapping a newly found side tunnel and reached the Great Hall, a large chamber deep in the cave where their long climb began. Robert had gone up first to check the way. Behind him, Johann and Bastian started climbing the rope, slowly but steadily. Then suddenly, a rock broke loose from the ceiling and struck Johann directly on the head. Johann immediately lost consciousness and remained hanging in his harness, motionless. Bastian climbed up to Johann and cut him free. Robert came back down, and together they laid Johann on the ground and tried to wake him up. He groaned but couldn't speak. His eyes were half open. He was alive, but something was clearly wrong. They feared brain damage, but they were nearly 1,000 meters deep in the cave, with no direct way to communicate with the outside world. Damn, what were they supposed to do? The only way to call for help was for someone to climb all the way back up the entrance, which would take over 12 hours, and every second mattered. Robert went on the long journey to get help. Bastian decided to stay and set up a small shelter around Johann. He used thermal blankets to keep him warm. As time passed, Johann began having seizures. He slipped in and out of consciousness. His condition got worse. Then, another disaster struck. He had another seizure, and this time, Johann stopped breathing. Bastian panicked. He started CPR right away, pressing hard on Johann's chest. The cave was silent, except for the sound of his hands pressing down. 1, 2, 3. Again. And then a blink. Small, slow, but he was alive. However, they were running out of supplies and the headlamps were starting to die. Meanwhile, above ground, Robert had reached the surface and called for help. Rescue teams and doctors arrived within the hour and a full cave rescue began. The rescuers and doctors went deeper and deeper, climbing for hours through tight shafts and freezing chambers. Finally, they reached them and checked Johann's condition. He was barely responsive and too weak to move, and no one knew if he could survive what came next. 6 days after the accident, the team stopped for 12 hours. Johann needed a break. The doctors gave him more fluids and pain medicine. His condition was alarming, but still, they kept going. As well planned as everything was, one danger still remained: the so-called rescue death. If Johann reached the surface too fast and his body relaxed too quickly, his blood pressure could crash and shut his body down. A doctor stood steady with an injection in case that happened. On June 19th, after 11 days underground, Johann finally reached the cave entrance. The crew executed the plan perfectly. A Cyclops cave rescue. On April 26, 2019, David Webb and his 5 close relatives were preparing for a recreational trip inside Cyclops Cave, Virginia. The area was known for its narrow tunnels and low ceilings, stretching over 7 miles and dropping hundreds of feet below the surface. Everything seemed normal. The group had successfully finished the first part of their trip and reached a dry spot near the lower section of the cave, where the return path usually began. Then, out of nowhere, rain began falling outside, and water started flooding into the cave, cutting off their way out. David quickly realized they were trapped and told the group to follow him. One by one, they crawled through the flooded passage. It was hard to breathe. Some began losing consciousness, drowning. Others turned back, got stuck, nearly gave up. But they pushed beyond their limits, pulled each other free, and dragged themselves onto a small ledge above the floodline. Then, they waited. Hours passed with no sign of rescue. David stayed calm, knowing his family would call for help if they didn't make it out. But would it be in time? The cave kept flooding. No cell signal, no way to call for help. The only option was to climb out. It would take hours, and time was running out. David paused at the flooded tunnel, knowing what it would take. If he failed, they wouldn't make it through the night. Then he turned back and began the crawling through narrow passageways and pulling himself up with just his hands and feet, refusing to give up. He slipped once, almost lost his grip, but he kept climbing the rope. Behind him, the others were freezing. Some of them were barely moving, their eyes were closed, skin cold, and they were shaking. No one said it, but everyone was scared. Meanwhile, around 1:30 a.m., David reached the surface and called 911. Within hours, emergency crews arrived and moved carefully through the cave, following the same path David had used. When they reached the trapped group, the men were sitting close together on the ledge. 3 had mild hypothermia, 2 were worse, barely conscious, their skin cold to the touch. Rescuers moved fast, checking pulses, trying to keep them awake and breathing. The exit was brutal. The first man had to be pulled up a steep shaft. The second crawled behind him. The third moved slowly, nearly collapsing at every turn. Then came the last 2, carried by hand, inch by inch. The rescue took nearly 12 hours. By 6 p.m., they were all out. They were rushed to the hospital. Their body temperatures were dangerously low, but they were alive, and that was enough. Thai Cave Rescue. On June 23, 2018, a group of 12 teenage boys were finishing football training in Chiang Rai, Thailand. The head coach left early, leaving the team with assistant coach Ekafon Chanthawong. Later that evening, the head coach's phone was full of missed calls. The kids hadn't come home. Parents were starting to panic. The head coach started calling them one by one. No answer. Finally, one boy picked up. He said the others had gone out after training to Tham Lang Cave in Mae Sai for a short trip, about 4 miles from the field. Nothing seemed unusual. The boys had been to Tham Lang before, but that day, the sky darkened and the rain was coming. No one knew it yet, but the cave was about to flood, and by nightfall, the boys and their assistant coach would disappear inside without a trace. Meanwhile, the head coach went full FBI mode and drove straight to the cave. But when he got there, he made a terrifying discovery. The boys' bikes were still lined up outside, a clear sign they hadn't come out. So he called the authorities. Later that night, local police and rescue teams arrived and tried to enter the cave. The cave was still flooding, and going any deeper could cost rescuers their lives. 2 days later, Thai Navy SEAL divers and volunteers joined the search. Heavy hoses were brought in to pump water out of the cave, hoping to lower flood levels, enough for rescuers to get through. But the rain kept coming, and with each hour, fears grew that it might already be too late. A British caving expert named Vernon Unsworth offered to help. He told officials he'd been in the cave many times and believed the boys were still alive, but officials were skeptical. They didn't see what a foreign hobbyist caver could do that their own Navy SEALs couldn't. Vernon couldn't dive himself, but he called 2 friends in England, Rick Stanton, a retired firefighter, and John Valentin, an IT consultant. Both were experienced volunteer cave rescuers and skilled divers. When they arrived and dropped into the water, visibility was low. In some sections, they had to crawl through tight spaces. In others, they had to swim against the current. Finally, they reached Chamber 3, a dry spot where tanks and supplies could be stored. But beyond that, the flooded tunnels were too dangerous. They turned back, hoping to try again later. 3 days later, Rick and John went back in. This time, they were better prepared and pushed deeper into the cave than ever before. After hours of swimming through freezing water, they reached a raised area called Nur Nam Sao, a small ledge above the floodline. And then, in the distance, they saw something. A flicker of light. As they swam toward it and started hearing voices, John turned on his camera. More than 2.5 miles from the entrance, cold and starving, all 11 boys in their coach were there, alive, hopeless. The boys had gone deeper to escape the rising flood and found a small dry space. They climbed onto it, a place known as the Pattaya Beach. No food, no fresh water for 9 days. They licked at muddy drops running down the cave walls. Everyone was celebrating, but the divers knew the hardest part hadn't started yet. Some of the boys couldn't even swim and could have drowned. Options were few: wait until the monsoon passed, or drill down through the mountain from above to reach them. Neither would work in time. Then a strange plan was proposed: sedate the boys and carry them out, unconscious. It sounded insane, but there was no other choice. Dr. Richard Harris, an anesthesiologist and cave diver from Australia, arrived in Thailand. He hated the idea, but he agreed. The plan was simple but risky. Each boy would be put to sleep with an injection, then pulled through by a cave diver, one by one. From that moment, their survival depended entirely on the person carrying them. And just like that, the first real mission began. 1 boy, unconscious and silent, was carried through the flooded cave. 3 more followed that same day, 4 more the next. But as well established as the procedure seemed at this point, something suddenly didn't work. The last boy was the smallest, and the mask didn't fit his face, no matter how much they tried. The divers pulled out a backup mask, one they were afraid to use. They pulled it tight on his face and hoped for the best. In the end, all 11, with the coach, walked out alive because no one gave up. Not them, not the world.